Alright, what's going on, everybody? Back again today doing another DC related video. Today I'm going to be talking about, as you can tell by the title, uh, mostly animated DC, specifically this idea that I have, and I call it the filter effect. And what this is it's basically, well, we'll get into that. I'll explain it. That's the whole point of the video. Mainly, what I want to address in this video is that I've said many times on this channel that I think the best versions of DC are its animated stuff. Animated TV shows, cartoons, movies, doesn't matter. All of it. And the reason I think that this ends up being the best versions of DC is because of this thing that I call the filter effect. And before we get into what exactly that is, let's go into some more depth about like which versions of animated DC I'm mainly talking about. Now, the two versions that I'm talking about are the DC animated universe, which we're all familiar with: Batman animated series, Superman animated series, Justice League Unlimited, stuff like that. And then the other one, which is the DC animated movie universe. This is a much more newer DC animated universe. It recently just ended with the release of this movie right here, Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. That came out about a year ago almost, and it kind of ended this iteration of DC animation universe. And so these are the two I'm really talking about here. And just for clarification's sake, so it makes a bit more sense when I talk about the filter effect, uh, when I talk about the DC animated universe, this animated property, or all of these animated properties that make up this franchise, the source material that inspired most of the episodes and most of the shows in this universe, comic book storylines from Crisis on Infinite Earths all the way up to Infinite Crisis. This show ended in 2006, and Infinite Crisis also ended in 2006. So, I mean, there's not a whole lot. There's really nothing in here based on Infinite Crisis. It's just like that was the cutoff because this was the last DC comic book major crossover story that happened while this was still going on. Now, there is some stuff in here that takes inspiration from things prior to Crisis on Infinite Earths, but it's few and far between for the most part. We're looking at stuff during this era. And then over here with this stuff, we're talking about the Flashpoint era, from Flashpoint to like throughout the whole New 52. There are some stories in here like the death of Superman and Reign of the Superman. Those are from the 90s, more like this era. And then Batman Hush also took place before Flashpoint, the New 52. But for the most part, this is a pretty New 52-esque adaptation of the DC universe. And I'll go ahead and explain what the filter effect is right now, or what I call the filter effect. So the filter effect is what happens when you take a bunch of source material. Doesn't matter if it's novels, comic books, it could be whatever. When you take a bunch of source material and you're going to adapt it into a new medium of entertainment, like taking print and adapting it into animation or live action, the filter effect is where the people who are doing the adaptation, they have the benefit of being able to look through all this source material, the novels, all the comic books, and they have the benefit of being able to kind of cherry pick out of all the source material what makes the best adaptation, like what's the best stuff out of here, they can only take they have the privilege of being able to take just the best and leave the not so good stuff by the wayside. And if they need to, they can also, they have the liberty of making slight tweaks and alterations to the source material to better fit their adaptation. So it's sort of like, in the instance here with DC, it's like taking the comic books, putting them through a filter, and the only thing that comes out the other side of the filter is pretty much all the good stuff, the positive stuff. Everything that, it wasn't very well received in the comic books and isn't all that great, that gets left on the other side of the filter. And what makes its way through is the good stuff, along with some slight tweaking and altering to really make it good. Yeah, Grant Morrison, JLA, that's another major thing that inspired the DC animated universe from the 90s and early 2000s. So, a good example of the tweaking and alterations made in the DC animated universe, like from the one from the 90s and the early 2000s. This one, they completely omitted Jason Todd. Now, before we go any further, I know that there is a brand new comic book series, Batman The Adventures Continue, out right now that is supposed to take place within the continuity, within the universe of the DC animated universe. And I know that Jason Todd as Red Hood shows up there, but for the most part, back when the DC animated universe was in full swing and all the shows were airing on TV, Jason Todd was completely omitted. There was no reference to him. They completely skipped over him to begin with. And the reason for that is because during that era where most of the source material is coming from, that Crisis on Infinite Earths all the way to, what is it, Infinite Crisis, Jason Todd was dead for the vast majority of it. You know, he didn't come back in comics until after the DC animated universe had ended. Justice League Unlimited had ended, and it was they weren't making any new episodes. And then later on after that, they brought Jason Todd back. But while the show was being made, Justice League Unlimited, Batman animated series, Jason Todd was mostly dead. So when they went ahead to make the show, they thought, okay, are we really going to bring this character in here just to kill him off and that be the end of it? And then also, you know, while these are good shows and they do have a lot of shelf value, and even as an adult I still like going back and watching them, to show the brutal death of a kid in a cartoon show that is, I guess, I mean, at its core it is made for kids, that would have been a little dark. So they had the liberty to just go ahead and omit that completely. They just completely left that out, and the series and the show doesn't suffer for it at all. They go straight from Dick Grayson being Batman, he moves on to being Nightwing, Tim Drake comes in as the new Robin, and everything goes perfectly fine. Like, the fact that they completely omitted Jason Todd didn't hurt it at all. So that's an example of like the kind of tweaking and alterations that get to be made through the filter effect. So after the DC animated universe ended in the early 2000s, DC they started making a bunch of just like standalone animated movies. Some of these are based on, you know, they are graphic novel adaptations. Like Batman Under the Red Hood specifically it's an adaptation of the storyline where Jason Todd returns. Batman Year One is a direct graphic novel adaptation. Justice League Doom is based on Tower of Babel. This is a direct comic book adaptation. This is based on the Superman Brainiac storyline. And this one right here, this is also a comic book adaptation of the Supergirl from Krypton story arc in the Superman Batman comic book line. So a lot of these are all still, you know, they're adapting the source material, but these movies here are not made to be thought of as part of like a connected universe. They're kind of just standalone movies. Fast forward a little bit further, and we get to 2011 when Flashpoint came out. And around this point in time, I guess DC Animated, their animation department division, decided, hey, you know what? I think it's time for another, you know, like connected animated universe. So let's go ahead and adapt Flashpoint, which they did, into the Justice League Flashpoint Paradox movie. And then from there, we got a plethora of new animated movies that all take place within the same universe, the same continuity. And this was mostly adapting storylines and comic book story arcs from, you know, the New 52 era, 2011 and on. Like I said before, stuff like, you know, Batman Hush and Death of Superman, that's from the 90s. Batman Hush is from like the late 2000s, but still, most of this stuff is New 52 inspired. And yeah, it's a really good adaptation. It's a really good example of how they took the New 52, they put it through a filter, and basically the filter just eliminated all the bad, and not even necessarily bad, but also just unnecessary stuff that was just, it didn't need to be in there, it didn't really add anything. It just kind of refined the whole New 52 era into this iteration of DC. Another good example of the tweaking and adjustments that were made are in this movie, Batman vs. Robin, arguably one of the best animated movies from this iteration of animated DC. This movie shows it's got the Court of Owls are the main villains, but it also shows Batman and his son Damian, who is the current Robin. They kind of butt heads over Robin is, you know, he was raised to be an assassin, a killer, Batman doesn't entirely trust him yet as Robin, and this took inspiration from two different storylines, specifically the Court of Owls saga, because like I said, the Court of Owls are the main villains of that movie, and then also this storyline, Batman and Robin Volume 1 Born to Kill. In this storyline, this is where we see the sort of like the butting of the heads between these two. There is a character in here called Nobody who he plays that role if he's trying to like lure Damien to just follow his killer instincts and seek out justice through any means necessary. And when the time came to adapt these two into a movie, DC animated their animation department. They liked this whole idea of like those two, they're still working through some issues. They don't entirely trust each other. They liked the idea of there being a guy, a third party who's kind of trying to manipulate Damien. But at the same time, the Court of Owls was much, much more successful in terms of like being a antagonist for Batman and the Bat family. So rather than use the character Nobody from this, they just omitted that completely and said, you know what, it's just going to be one of the Talons, one of these guys from the Court of Owls. He's going to be the guy that tries to pit Damien against Bruce and manipulate Damien into being a killer. So they just, yeah, they used what was good from this and they left out what wasn't really necessary. Like they didn't need to add in that extra villain, Nobody. The Court of Owls was good enough for that job, and so they left it out and they made the tweaks and alterations necessary, and we got a great Batman versus Robin movie because of it. So just another good example of how the filtering effect was applied in this DC animated movie universe. Now, something that I think would just be really cool, and this doesn't have so much to do with the filtering effect, this is just an idea I had, was I think it would be cool to, on some level, be able to connect the DC animated universe to the DC animated movie universe. And in order to do this, there's one key thing that has to be addressed, and that's the Flash. In the DC animated universe from the 90s and early 2000s, it's confirmed like the Flash is Wally West. It's not Barry Allen. But in the animated movie universe, it is Barry Allen. So, we'd have to address the fact of like where was Barry Allen in order to connect the two, it's like where was Barry Allen during all of this, and why wasn't he featured here very much, and then why did he all of a sudden show back up again to do the Flashpoint? Now, I am well aware that there have been a couple, at least one, this one right here, there have been a couple tie-in comics to the DC animated universe that sort of acknowledge Barry Allen's existence and establish him in continuity. Adventures in DC Comics #2 does this. Wally West, the Flash, it's mainly a Flash story set in the DC animated universe. He kind of narrates to the reader a little bit of backstory about how he became the Flash, and he talks about how he was the sidekick to the original Flash, Barry Allen, and all he really says, though, in this narration is that Barry died saving the universe. He doesn't really tell you how. There's just I don't have it included here in this presentation, but there is a panel from the comic that just shows it's Wally West, and he's holding the kind of tattered remains of Barry Allen's Flash suit, and he says Barry Allen died saving the universe, and then Wally becomes the Flash, and that's why Wally is the Flash for most of the DC animated universe. So yes, I do understand that there have been some instances where Barry Allen has acknowledged to have existed in the DC animated universe. However, I would like something a little more concrete. So my idea, in a way to form a quote-unquote spiritual connection between the DC animated universe and the DC animated movie universe, would be to do two new movies. We've been seeing new movies come out that take place still in the DC animated universe, namely Batman and Harley Quinn and Justice League vs. Fatal 5. So the idea of them doing more movies set in the DC animated universe is not off the table, clearly. And then, as I've said before, we've seen them do direct graphic novel adaptations also. So I think that they should do a movie that establishes it's a DC animated universe movie, but it establishes Barry Allen. This is a fan concept art of what Barry Allen would look like in the DC animated universe. They should do a Flash-based movie within the DC animated universe and establish Barry Allen concrete. They don't really have to show how he died or anything, but like just explain that he was real and that he disappeared somehow. He went missing. I'm not saying you have to kill him in this movie, but definitely show that he was Flash before Wally. Wally was his sidekick, and this guy Barry Allen, somehow he disappeared, got lost in the Speed Force, went missing, something like that. And then on the other hand, you would also do a animated film adaptation of Final Crisis, because as we know, in Final Crisis, that's the return of Barry Allen. Wally West and Jay Garrick are investigating some stuff. I'm trying not to give too much away in case anyone wants to read Final Crisis and you haven't. But a little spoiler alert. Wally West and Jay Garrick are investigating some stuff, and they actually find Barry in the Speed Force. He's still alive and well, and they manage to bring him out, and he returns to the main DC timeline. And then this, of course, leads into later on down the road Flashpoint, because now that Barry's back, he can do the Flashpoint. Another reason why Final Crisis would work really well in connecting the DCAU with the DC animated movie universe is because the DC animated universe ended off in Justice League Unlimited with Lex Luthor. In order to stop Darkseid's attack on Earth, he gave him, quote unquote, the anti-life equation. And then they both just kind of like disappeared in a blinding flash of light. And we don't know what happened to them. We still to this day don't know where did they go, what happened. Now, Final Crisis just so happens to be a story about Darkseid gets the anti-life equation, he has it, and he uses it to take over the minds of pretty much the entire population of Earth. Like, he actually wins. He conquers Earth. And so, yeah, it also kind of fits in with where Justice League Unlimited left off. So I think that would be a great adaptation to do. And yeah, if you do that, we then have Justice League Unlimited ending with Lex Luthor giving Darkseid the anti-life equation. We do a Flash movie in the DCAU establishing Barry Allen and showing like how he got, show him getting lost in the Speed Force or going missing or something. And then we do Final Crisis, which shows Barry Allen returning. It shows Darkseid has the anti-life equation and he's conquering Earth and they have to defeat him. Barry Allen returns, and then once Barry Allen is back, it leads, it lines up perfectly for this Flashpoint Paradox movie, because now that Barry Allen's back, he can do all the stuff he does here, which sets up the rest of these movies. So that's just a nifty idea I had, and I think it plays well with this filter effect because, like I said, when an adaptation is being done, the people doing the adaptation have the benefit of being able to just kind of like put the source material through a filter and control what makes it into the adaptation and what doesn't, which usually adds like a refined quality to the adaptation and leads it to being better than the source material. They have the benefit of being able to kind of cherry pick what was really good and what works well, and leaving all the unnecessary and just sometimes downright bad stuff out of it. So that's my take on that. Let me know what you guys think about this whole filter effect concept that I've kind of just had this epiphany on. And then also, what do you guys think about them trying to do like a spiritual connection between the DCAU and the DC animated movie universe? Do you think it could work? And do you think my idea is the best way to do it? Or do you think, anybody out there with a better idea of how to connect the two? Let me know in the comments below. Give me some feedback. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, check out some of my other videos, and I will see you guys next time.